anything going on now? Anything going on now? Mumbling to myself, I'm afraid. Okay. Hello. I have to apologize for mumbling to myself. I have no idea why I did that. Hello, Kay. Hi, Steve Gonzo. Thank you for that reference. Amber Grigo says, good evening, my lovelies. And Dolores Pierce says, hi all. And Go Start, the famous Go Start on YouTube, gives an icon which doesn't show up well here in this interface. Warren Chamberlain says hello. Steve Wolfbrand says hi. Hiya, Steve. Okay, tonight I'm going to start off with my rebuttal to Joe Manchin's op-ed in Carolina Gazette. Hi, Holly Horn. So, I'm going to share that. I've reformatted it from the newspaper. I basically copied it and I interwove. Let's see how it looks to you at this point. What I did is I interwove my replies everywhere I wanted to make a reply. So that's the way you're seeing it now. You are seeing on your screen what Joe Manchin said. He is JM, and I am JMF. My middle initial is M, so I'm JMF. And Joe Manchin published this in the Charleston Gazette Mail on June 6, 2021. The title of it is Joe Manchin, Why I'm Voting Against the For the People Act. First, a quote from Joe Manchin. The right to vote is fundamental to our American democracy, and protecting that right should not be about party or politics, least of all protecting this right, which is a value I share, should never be done in a partisan manner. And I said in reply, it should not be about party or politics, but it clearly is, since Republican state legislatures across the country have passed and are passing, that was supposed to be, and are passing, laws allowing voter suppression of likely Democratic voters and gerrymandering of state legislative and congressional districts to give the Republican Party a predictable advantage in likely votes in district after district. Do you deny that is occurring across the country at an accelerating pace, and that it is being done in a partisan manner in state after state by Republican Party legislators? Excuse the absence of a question mark at the end of that sentence. Joe Manchin followed, not actually my reply, but what follows in his editorial is, quote, during my time as West Virginia's Secretary of State, we are getting an echo from your system. I can't even get to you. Well, silence your sound, please. During my time as West Virginia's Secretary of State, I was determined to protect this right and ensure our elections are fair, accessible, and secure, not to benefit my party, but all the people of West Virginia. For example, as Secretary of State, I took specific actions to establish early voting for the first time in West Virginia in order to provide expanded options for those whose work or family schedule made it difficult for them to vote on Election Day. Throughout my tenure in politics, I've been guided by this simple philosophy. Our party labels can prevent us from doing what is right. And I said in reply to that paragraph, I'm glad that as Secretary of State in West Virginia, you protected early voting for all. But I must point out that your protection of everyone's right to vote was not done as part of an institution that was governed by both parties. You were fulfilling an executive function, and you were a Democrat, so you did not seek Republican opinions about whether or not you should expand voting options. You made the judgment that it was part of your job as Secretary of State to expand those options, and bipartisanship did not enter into your decision. Instead, you just decided that was the right thing to do in accordance with the law. If the Republicans had asked you not to do that, you would not have agreed. Indeed, you would have thought that such a request was out of order, and you would have gone ahead with doing what was right, regardless of what any Republican said. Joe Manchin's the next part of Joe Manchin's piece, I quote, unfortunately, we now are witnessing that the fundamental right to vote has itself become overtly politicized. Today's debate about how to best protect our right to vote and to hold elections, however, is not about finding common ground, but seeking partisan advantage. Whether it is state laws that seek to needlessly restrict voting, or politicians who ignore the need to secure our elections, partisan policymaking won't instill confidence in our democracy, it will destroy it. To that, I say, if one believes that there is a fundamental right to vote, then the only way that right can become politicized is if some deny that right and therefore think it is okay for them to try to restrict it for political advantage or other purposes. Today's debate exists because many have politicized the right to vote in just that way. The reason why people cannot agree on how to best protect our right to vote and to hold elections is not because the debate is not finding common ground. It is because one side of the debate doesn't want to protect voting rights and insists that voter suppression and gerrymandering, undermining these rights, is acceptable behavior in the quest to win elections, while the other wants to protect those rights and thinks that it is about facilitating the voting process in every way possible while protecting the integrity of that process. You say that, quote, partisan policymaking won't install confidence in our democracy, it will destroy it, unquote. But policymaking by state legislatures and governors is undermining voting rights through voter suppression and gerrymandering right now, while proposed by legislation in Congress that you are blocking and say you will not vote for is about protecting voting rights by prohibiting these practices. You are saying that both efforts at legislation are partisan and will destroy democracy for that reason. But one effort is undermining voter rights and democracy by creating one-party states and setting up state legislatures to deny certifications of popular vote winners their victories, while the other effort is protecting democracy by preventing voter suppression, gerrymandering, and state legislative takeovers of certification processes. Now, since I wrote that, I recalled that H.R. 1 does not yet protect against state legislature takeovers of the certifications processes. I think it has to be amended to stopping that particular practice. Because if it doesn't, then preventing voter suppression and gerrymandering just won't be enough. I go on. So the first partisan effort certainly destroy democracy, while the second will protect it, despite the fact that it is also partisan. Aren't you saying that the fruit of the partisan tree will always destroy democracy because it always destroys confidence in it, when in this case it is plain that one partisan effort, the Republican partisan effort, will surely destroy democracy, while the other, the Democratic partisan effort, will surely save it despite its partisan nature, because its result will be free, fair, and clearly unrigged elections that will instill confidence in the electoral machinery of our democracy. Joe Manchin's next statement, quote, as such, congressional action on federal voting rights by legislation must be the result of both Democrats and Republicans coming together to find a pathway forward, or we risk further dividing and destroying the republic we swore to protect and defend as elected officials, unquote. To that I say, but what if Democrats and Republicans come together with bipartisan legislation that doesn't solve the problems of voter suppression, gerrymandering, and partisan state legislature control of the election certification process? In that case, won't the bipartisan legislation simply destroy our democracy because its result will be one-party rule in a majority of states and one-party rule in all three branches of the federal government? No, I think the answer to those questions is obvious. Those are rhetorical questions. Joe Manchin's statement, as such, congressional action on federal voting rights legislation must be the result of both Democrats and Republicans coming together to find a pathway forward. That is obviously doesn't work. It depends on whether the problem of protecting voter rights is solved by the content of the legislation. It does not depend on whether the legislation is bipartisan or not. Joe Manchin says, Democrats in Congress have proposed a sweeping election reform bill called the For the People Act. This more than 800-page bill has garnered zero Republican support. Does this have to do with the length of the bill? Perhaps the Republicans weren't able to read it. Joe Manchin says, why? Are the very Republican senators who voted to impeach Trump because of actions that led to an attack on democracy unwilling to support actions to strengthen our democracy? Are these same senators who many in my party applauded for their courage now threats to the very democracy we seek to protect? And I answer. You ask whether the 7 senators who voted to impeach Trump are now willing to support actions to strengthen democracy, and specifically why they're unwilling to support H.R. 1. The answers are easy. Excuse me, this will stop in a moment. Just because the 7 were unwilling to excuse incitement of a violent attack on the Capitol doesn't mean they're in support of strengthening democracy by voting for legislation that would restrict Republican efforts to suppress vote, gerrymander elections, or rig certification elections, a problem that still needs to be addressed by H.R. 1. The difference between the two is the difference between supporting the violent overthrow of the institutions of the House and the Senate, and supporting the peaceful subversion of our democracy while retaining its form and manipulating its result. One can easily balk at the first and fail to object, to the second. For example, take Senator Romney. He voted to convict Trump, but when has he ever voted against voter suppression? When has he ever voted against gerrymandering? Never. He has never spoken out against voter suppression. He has never spoken out against gerrymandering. You can search high and low trying to find his statements about that. But he appears to be perfectly supportive of the peaceful subversion of our democracy while retaining its form and manipulating its result. In any case, however, 7 Republicans, along with 50 Democrats, are not enough to pass H.R. 1 and H.R. 4, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, as long as the filibuster is in place. So, you, Joe Manchin, haven't established that either voting rights bill, or better ones than both, can be passed with the help of a 60-40 cloture vote involving 10 Republican senators. Right? In the next part of his piece, Joe Manchin says, quote, "The truth, I would argue, is that voting and election reform that is done in a partisan manner will all but ensure partisan divisions continue to deepen," unquote. In reply, the above isn't an argument. It's an assertion. It's a statement. Statement isn't an argument. Voting and election reform done in a partisan manner, but actually creating a fair electoral process, may ensure that partisan divisions dissipate after a few elections that create a broad perception among the public that our electoral machinery can be trusted. That's a more plausible outcome than your conjecture that people will hold a grudge over partisanship in the face of a good outcome. Look at our history. New Deal legislation was largely partisan, but by the time of President Eisenhower's administration, we were seeing the heyday of bipartisanship in our nation because a consensus developed that the New Deal legislation was here for good. Eisenhower didn't try to replace it or try to attack it. In some instances, he tried to strengthen the laws that were passed by the FDR administration. But since the Powell Memo during the 1970s, large elements of the business community and the donor class have determined they will roll back most of the New Deal achievements. And this is what has ultimately led to extreme partisanship that we now see in the Congress. Bottom line, bipartisanship that can benefit people can only happen when there is an underlying consensus that it is the job of legislators to legislate for the people. That consensus doesn't exist now. That's why when senators and congressmen start talking about bipartisanship these days, the rest of us start worrying about our wallets. Or maybe the saying is, we start holding tight onto our wallets, however you want to put that. Joe Manchin says, further in his piece, with that in mind, some Democrats have again proposed eliminating the Senate filibuster rule in order to pass the For the People Act with only Democratic support. They've attempted to demonize the filibuster and conveniently ignore how it has been critical to protecting the rights of Democrats in the past. Quote, as a reminder, just 4 short years ago in 2017, when Republicans held control of the White House and Congress, President Donald Trump was publicly urging Senate Republicans to eliminate the filibuster. Then it was Senate Democrats who were proudly defending the filibuster. 33 Senate Democrats penned a letter to Senators Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell warning of the perils of eliminating the filibuster. And I say to that, Democrats have pointed out the various times when the filibuster was used to block laws or bills designed to protect people's rights. There was legislation designed to end or limit the evil of slavery. There was legislation designed to secure civil rights and civil liberties of people. There was legislation designed to create important economic justice conditions that would have improved the lives of the American people. This is not, quote, demonizing the filibuster. It is only providing the historical record of how the filibuster has been used. You talk about 33 Democrats penning a defense of the filibuster, but you don't mention that their defense of the filibuster was not in the service of stopping a bill that was going to remove the rights of the people. It was about defending their own power as senators and about blocking a bill that provided tax cuts mostly benefiting the rich. It wasn't about defending the rights of Democrats in the voting booth. They weren't involved in that. They were trying to protect their power, the same way you're trying to protect your power now by refusing to get rid of the filibuster. Joe Manchin also says this: it has been said by much wiser people than me that absolute power corrupts absolutely, quote unquote. Well, what I've seen during more time in Washington is that every party in power will always want to exercise absolute power absolutely. Our founders were wise to see the temptation of absolute power and built in specific checks and balances to force compromise that serves to preserve our fragile democracy. The Senate, its processes and rules have evolved over time to make absolute power difficult while still delivering solutions to the issues facing our country, and I believe that's the Senate's best quality. My reply is, while Lord Acton's warning is always something we should remember, we also should remember that applying principles without considering the context is dangerous. Right now, the Republicans have absolute power in the Senate to block laws that are being passed through regular order. And they are the minority in the Senate. In addition, that minority represents something like 41 million less people than the Democratic majority. They have an absolute power to block the will of 41 million people more than the people who support what they're doing. Perhaps it is the absolute power of that small minority of Republicans to block legislation that solves problems for Americans that has corrupted the Republican senators to such an extent that they will not vote for H.R. 1 and H.R. 4, even though they know that not voting for those bills will absolutely rig the upcoming 2022 and 2024 elections in their favor. Their unwillingness to support these bills is proof of their ultimate corruption in the context of our democracy. That corruption is their willingness to betray the principle of fair elections in a democracy on the altar of the quest for one-party dominance as far as the eye can see. In addition, I must point out that passage of S1 in the Senate, which is the corresponding bill to H.R. 1 in the House, is not a case of the exercise of absolute power by the ruling party in the Senate. That's because the House still has to agree with the Senate. The president has to approve S1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and both will be subject to judicial review by a Supreme Court with a 6-3 Republican majority created by a partisan GOP Senate overriding minority opposition of the Democrats at that time. In other words, in the present context, extreme partisanship by the Republicans has already unbalanced the political system and created the potential of a naked one-party state if the Republican partisans at the state level have their way. For you to now insist on bipartisanship in the Senate before passing bills that are needed to address the balance between the two parties and the nation at large is to use the idea that we should practice bipartisanship at the level of the Senate to ensure that partisanship in the context of one-party rule will prevail across the United States. That is, you are practicing loyalty to a suicide pact that very few Republicans on their side, if any, will practice with you. The Constitution is not a suicide pact, and neither are the rules of the Senate. You really need to stop looking at the Senate trees and see the burning forest beyond them. Joe Manchin also says, quote, yes, this process, the bipartisanship process of hammering out compromise, he didn't say that, I just editorialized there. It will force compromises, he did say that. They're not always ideal, but consider the alternative. Do we really want to live in an America where one party can dictate and demand everything and anything it wants, whenever it wants? I have always said, if I can't go home and explain it, I can't vote for it. And I cannot explain strictly partisan election reform or blowing up the Senate rules to expedite one party's agenda. And then I say in reply to that, that's just the point. By opposing H.R. 1 and by refusing to get rid of the filibuster, you are enabling one-party rule in America. Since if the actions of the Republican state legislatures are allowed to stand, that will bring one-party rule to the United States and likely a fascist Trumpist dictatorship as well. Literally, the choice here is between H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 and democracy on the one hand, and bipartisanship and the filibuster leading to fascist dictatorship on the other. You are enabling what you profess to hate the most. Get out of the way, Joe. Support H.R. 1, H.R. 4, and other popular bills, or your legacy will be literally that of the Senate, who was most responsible for driving the last nail into the coffin of U.S. democracy. Joe Manchin also says, the truth is, there is a better way if we seek to find it together. The Voting Rights Act, for example, was monumental in the fight to guarantee freer and fairer elections in the United States. Since its original passage, it has been reauthorized with overwhelming bipartisan votes 5 separate times. In addition, there is bipartisan support to pass the latest iteration of this legislation, the rightfully named John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Quote, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, quote again actually, would update the formula states and localities must use to ensure proposed voting laws do not restrict the rights of any particular group or population. My Republican colleague, Senator Lisa Murkowski, has joined me in urging Senate leadership to update and pass this bill through regular order. I continue to engage with my Republican and Democratic colleagues about the value of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and I am encouraged by the desire from both sides to transcend partisan politics and strengthen our democracy by protecting voting rights. Of course, some in my party have argued that now is the time to discard such bipartisan voting reforms and embrace election reforms and policies solely supported by one party. Respectfully, I do not agree. Quoting from Joe some more, I believe that partisan voting legislation will destroy the already weakening binds, I think he meant actually bonds, of our democracy. And for that reason, I will vote against the For the People Act. Furthermore, I will not vote to weaken or eliminate the filibuster. For as long as I have the privilege of being your U.S. Senator, I will fight to represent the people of West Virginia, to seek bipartisan compromise, no matter how difficult, and to develop the political bonds that end divisions and help unite the country we love. Quote again, okay, American democracy is something special. It is bigger than one party or the tweet-filled partisan attack politics of the moment. It is my sincere hope that all of us, especially those who are privileged to serve, remember our responsibility to do more to unite this country before it is too late. I reply to that. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act is not enough by itself to protect voting rights because it does not provide protection against voter suppression, gerrymandering, and decertification of fairly won electoral victories by partisan state legislatures. Our democracy needs much more than the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act to protect voting in our democracy. You say you will fight to represent the people of West Virginia, but that is the last thing you are doing. West Virginia is among the poorest states of the Union, in the Union. I remember when its senators, not too many years ago, proudly stood for Medicare for all, for infrastructure programs, and for unions. And for your information, H.R. 1 is supported, according to polling, by a majority of your constituents in West Virginia, a substantial majority. You don't support H.R. 1, but they do. In your lack of support of H.R. 1, you are not representing West Virginians. You are not representing the people of West Virginia. Furthermore, the people of West Virginia need and will benefit from infrastructure packages much broader than what even Joe Biden has on offer right now. They would benefit from Medicare for all. They would benefit from the PRO Act and from H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 and expanded Social Security and from the Green New Deal with a just transition, including a job guarantee and a living wage, and from student debt elimination. You should be jumping up and down 7 days a week for all these things. But no, you're either against them or offer only half-hearted token support while continuing to support the filibuster that stands in the way of passing them. Joe Manchin, Bernie Sanders is a better fighter for the people of West Virginia than you are. You should be ashamed of yourself. You are not delivering for them, as you are not delivering for the rest of the people of the United States. You say that American democracy is bigger than any one party, and I agree. But American democracy is also bigger than both parties and the idea of bipartisanship as well. You are proceeding to sacrifice American democracy on the altar of Senate bipartisanship in this time and place, in spite of the broader context of your fight with others in the Senate. You have lost sight of that context, and you do not see that it is U.S. democracy that needs you now more than the Senate rules and the idea of bipartisanship. You need, at this point, to uphold your oath to the Constitution by defending democracy and by preventing the movement to one-party democracy that is being so powerfully advanced right now by the Trumpist movement and by the Republican state legislatures. You need to join with other Democrats in blocking this effort. And if that means giving up the filibuster, then you must give up the filibuster. Democracy is more important than the filibuster. And if that means giving up bipartisanship, then you must give up bipartisanship, because you did not take an oath to bipartisanship. You did not take an oath to the filibuster. You took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States and to uphold our democracy. That is your obligation. That is your responsibility, and it is time that you, Joe Manchin, fulfilled it. Thank you. So, I want you to remember at this time, I want to recall to you the simple point I covered last time from the Huffington Post article on Kirsten Sinema. Quote, I do not think that Senator Sinema, every senator should support, I do think that Senator Sinema and every senator should support ending the filibuster for the voting rights bill, unquote, he said, adding, quote again, to keep the Jim Crow filibuster while losing some of these basic voting rights that are central to our democracy is preposterous, unquote. Quote again, Senator Sinema should know that. So should Senator Manchin. At the end of the day, I'm very hopeful that they'll come around and do the right thing. But if they don't, then I don't think they belong in the Senate anymore. And I do agree with the former Attorney General Grant Woods, of Arizona. If you vote against H.R. 1, as you say you are going to right now, Joe Manchin, then I too don't think that you belong in the Senate anymore. And if you do vote against it, I call for your resignation from the United States Senate directly. And now, the view of Robert Kuttner. I think this was a post by Robert Kuttner in the American Politics called Delusions of Bipartisanship. This was done today on June 8th. And there's a picture of the deluded one himself, of the one that I am calling the dishonorable one, because he is betraying democracy and his oath of office to the Constitution of the United States. On Sunday, the quirky West Virginia Democrat wrote an op-ed in his home state, Charleston Gazette-Mail, declaring that he would not vote for the Democrats' omnibus pro-democracy bill, H.R. 1, called the For the People Act. He also declared categorically, furthermore, quote, furthermore, I will not vote to weaken or eliminate the filibuster. The New York Times print headline captured the gravity of the situation, quote, breaking ranks, Manchin dooms key voting bill, unquote. But as always with Manchin, things are a little more complicated than they seem, opines Robert Kuttner. Take the case of the key voting bill that Manchin has doomed. This refers to an 818-page behemoth wish list that includes every possible reformer's dream, from public financing of elections and anti-gerrymander rules to much tougher conflict of interest prohibitions and a great deal more. I'm sure it's the conflict of interest prohibitions that bother Manchin the most, by the way. In an ideal world, it would pass Congress overwhelmingly. But this is far from an ideal world, and there are some in the pro-democracy movement who will tell you, way off the record, that treating this non-starter of a bill as the core objective is not strategically smart. Far more important for 2022 than H.R. 1 is H.R. 4, also known as the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. That bill would restore and expand the preclearance powers of the Department of Justice under the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which were taken away in the 2013 Supreme Court decision, Shelby County versus Holder. In his majority opinion in Shelby, Chief Justice John Roberts held that preclearance by the Justice Department was no longer warranted because jurisdictions that once discriminated on the basis of race had ceased doing so. It took about 10 minutes after the decision came down for much of the Deep South to invent new forms of discrimination and suppression. It would be hard for the High Court today to maintain that a new preclearance bill was no longer necessary based on the facts. Here, Senator Manchin has left us some hope. He says he is for a version of voting rights restoration that in some ways goes further than H.R. 1. I continue to engage with my Republican and Democratic colleagues about the value of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, unquote. He wrote in the same op-ed. Some Manchin watchers suspect he went out of his way to trash H.R. 1 in his hometown paper so that he could more easily support H.R. 4 as the moderate alternative. Manchin points to Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who has said she is open to supporting some version of the Voting Rights Act. The problem is that she is very lonely in the Republican caucus. At most, one or two other Republicans might vote with her, far short of the 60 votes needed to overcome a filibuster. Now, before I go on with the article, I just want to point out, in addition, it may be that Lisa Murkowski of Alaska will soon find herself as part of the Democratic Party, or at least as an independent senator from Alaska, caucusing with the Democratic Party. Why do I say that? Because Lisa Murkowski is running in 2022. And as sure as you're born, Lisa Murkowski is going to be primaried by a Trumpist up in Alaska. That means she may very well lose the Republican primary if she runs in that primary in Alaska. Judging from what she did in recent years, what Lisa Murkowski will do then is run a campaign for the Senate as an independent. If necessary, she will even run a write-in campaign. She has won a write-in campaign after a rightist defeated her in the Republican primaries previously. But it is likely this time that if she wants to run against a Trumpist who has a big polling lead in the Republican Party, it is likely this time that she might well consider switching over to the Democratic Party and running as a Democrat in order to retain her seat. That is something that is very likely to happen. She is, after all, no more to the right than Joe Manchin. If there's room in the Democratic Party for Joe Manchin, there's room in the Democratic Party for Lisa Murkowski. In fact, she may not be as right-wing as Joe Manchin. That was commentary. This brings us, now back to Kuttner's article. This brings us to the next act of the Manchin drama. Joe Manchin, that is, and the filibuster. Soon it will be very clear that Republicans are not close to meeting Democrats halfway on public infrastructure spending. At that point, Democrats will either need to try to break a filibuster and pass the bill by a simple majority, or use the next reconciliation bill, which can't be filibustered, to do it by simple majority. My educated guess is that Manchin will refuse filibuster reform to enact the infrastructure bill, but that he will vote with his party to enact infrastructure outlays via reconciliation, just as he did on the last major $1.9 trillion Biden spending bill for COVID relief in March. But what about the end game on voting rights? In the next several weeks, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer will bring up one bill after another, knowing that all will be killed by filibuster. This will make clear to Manchin that his fantasy of 10 good Republicans coming to the aid of the Republic is just that, a fantasy. This is especially the case on voting rights, where the entire Republican game to take back a House and Senate majority is based on voter suppression. No, I don't think that's the entire Republican game exactly, Robert. I think part of their game is decertification of the victors of elections by the state legislatures. In other words, basically revoking the right of direct election of congresspeople and senators by decertifying their choices, by decertifying the voters' choices. Once it is clear to Manchin that the only way to get the voting rights reform that he supports is via a one-time exemption from the filibuster, which can be done by simple majority. Yes, it can. You can use the nuclear option to get rid of the filibuster, but limit the motion to that one bill. That can be done. It's a stupid thing to do, because when you use the nuclear option, you should use it to get rid of the filibuster, to just get rid of the filibuster. But certainly, if Joe Manchin is in strong support of a bill and is willing to get rid of the filibuster to pass that bill, and perhaps the progressives in the Senate should threaten to walk away from that bill themselves if the exemption from the filibuster doesn't include certain areas that are very, very important to them, like healthcare legislation and Green New Deal legislation and legislation on student debt elimination, legislation on paid family leave, and legislation called the PRO Act to enable unions, and also legislation on the minimum wage. There are a whole bunch of things that our progressive senators would like to exempt from the filibuster. Anyway, Kuttner goes on. There could even be a Manchin-Murkowski bill that Leader Schumer makes the official Democratic bill. Would Manchin allow Republicans to filibuster to death a bill with his name on it? Would Murkowski let the Republicans filibuster to death a bill with her name on it? I just added that thought to this. We'll soon find out whether Democrats stand a chance of having tolerably fair midterm elections next year, and keeping control of Congress could literally hinge on which way Manchin goes. Yes, if Biden sits there and twiddles his thumbs for all these months, there are various things that he could and should do. We'll get to those later. And there's one possible exception to the utter failure of bipartisanship. That is the China bill that Schumer has carefully worked out with leading Republicans. Unless Republicans get cold feet at handing Schumer a win, the $250 billion bill called the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, which is industrial policy and economic nationalism by another name, could pass the Senate later this week. Why? One reason is Donald Trump. Where Trump was a total patsy for Vladimir Putin in his own inept way, Trump tried to get tough with China. So that makes it okay for Trump acolytes in the Senate to get tough with China. Will any of that bipartisanship on China rub off onto voting rights? Sure it will. When Trump and the Republicans abandon the strategy of clinging to power by killing democracy. I think, Mr. Kuttner, that we're going to wait an awfully long time for that last to happen. So, of course, bipartisanship on China is not about to rub off onto voting rights. Next, William Rivers Pitt, our truth out. End. And Pitt has to say a whole bunch of very good things. First, the headline, Manchin's effort to screw his own party is so monumental, it shocked Fox News. This is from June 7th, from Truth Out, William Rivers Pitt. Let me see if I have this straight. The very right to vote is being fed into a meat grinder in several of the GOP-controlled states Donald Trump almost lost in 2020. For example, it is now illegal in Georgia to bring water and snacks to people forced to wait hours in line to vote, said lines existing thanks to several other new anti-voter rules that have also been enacted, but Congress can't pass a voter protections bill. There is an ongoing political crisis in this country over employment, one that has reached such a pitch that Republican governors are preparing to slash unemployment aid to force people back into low-paying and or dangerous jobs, but Congress can't pass an infrastructure bill and help folks get to work putting this crumbling country back together again. 6 months and 1 day ago, a raging army of Trump voters steamrolled, wasn't that 5 months and 1 day ago? It'll be 6 months and 1 day ago in July, right? A raging army of Trump voters steamrolled law enforcement and sacked the U.S. Capitol building, seeking to disrupt the certification of the November election. That, of course, was on January 6th. Several in the crowd were vocal about their desire to murder House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Vice President Mike Pence. People died, scores were injured, and human feces got smeared on the walls. Afterward, many of the attackers claimed they had been given permission to act by Trump, who whipped them into a frenzy before turning them loose on the city. But Congress can't look into the root causes of that mayhem, though it happened in their offices, hallways, and voting chambers. The Democratic Party holds majority control in the House and Senate by a cat's slim whisker at present, but they hold it nonetheless. The reason these immediately pressing crises remain unresolved is because Republicans have use of the filibuster, which was never intended to be a bedrock rule of Senate procedure. In fact, the filibuster was born in 1805, and by the way, remember when Joe Manchin said the founding fathers put in certain checks and balances? Ho, ho, Joe. They didn't put in the filibuster. It was born in 1805 when Aaron Burr, the traitor to the United States, rewrote the rules of the Senate without any oversight and accidentally created it. Even he did it only accidentally. Closure did not come to exist until 1917, and the filibuster wasn't actually used until 1837, when it was used by Senator Charles C. Calhoun in order to protect slavery in the United States. Now, Pitt didn't say that last. I added it after his 1837. In short, the filibuster rules were not handed down by the god of parliamentary procedure and chiseled onto stone tablets. There is nothing intrinsic about the filibuster that lends it special or protected status. Quite the opposite, in fact. The main use of the procedure for decades was to stymie civil rights laws and protect Jim Crow in the South. Anything so filthy and wrong should be stuffed into a sack and buried on a moonless night. William Rivers Pitt, great. Yet here we sit, watching like helpless puppies as Mitch McConnell and his disciplined GOP minority drop 60-vote roadblocks in front of virtually every piece of legislation proposed by the Biden administration and the majority. They're not even against all the stuff they're thwarting. The point is not progress, but to hobble the administration so they can run on and fundraise off those failed endeavors in 2022. The Republican Party appears to have no agenda beyond whatever Trump is on about this week. They are seeking to run out the clock, period. Why is this tolerated? Because Joe Manchin, Democratic senator, wants it this way. He is not alone in his devotion to the filibuster rule. Kirsten Sinema of Arizona, John Tester of Montana, and a smattering of other right-leaning Democrats share his profoundly misplaced zeal for it, but Manchin has placed himself four square in the middle of the debate, and he ain't moving. Quote, I will not vote to weaken or eliminate the filibuster, unquote, Manchin wrote in a goopy weekend op-ed for the Charleston Gazette-Mail. Quote, for as long as I have the privilege of being your U.S. Senator, I will fight to represent the people of West Virginia, to seek bipartisan compromise, no matter how difficult, to develop the political bonds that end division and unite the country we love, unquote. For the record, Manchin also used this op-ed to announce his opposition to the proposed voting rights bill. His reason? Republicans don't like it enough. Actually, his reason was that not enough Republicans like it enough. But, okay. Republicans' apparently bottomless desire to screw his own party is so monumental, in fact, that even the folks at Fox News felt compelled to call him out. Quote, the question I have is whether or not you're doing it exactly the wrong way, unquote, pressed Fox anchor Chris Wallace on Sunday. Quote, if you were to keep the idea that maybe you would vote to kill the filibuster, won't that give Republicans an incentive to actually negotiate? Because old Joe Manchin is out there, and who knows what he's going to do by taking it off the table? Haven't you empowered Republican obstructionists? Or haven't you empowered the Republicans to be obstructionists, unquote? A sound argument, to which Manchin could only reply with some version of barge, 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 brave Republicans, barge, 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 good signs, barge, barge, Republican friends, barge, barge, give us time. That, my friends, is what the English call argy-bargy. That's the thing, Sonny Joe. Quote, that's the thing, Sonny Joe. There is no time. We are pinwheeling toward the massive August recess. And by the time Congress returns, all they will be thinking about is next year's elections. That's not quite true. Because before the August recess, we have the debt ceiling crisis Congress is going to have to solve. And before they start thinking about next year's elections, they're going to have to start thinking about how to solve the debt ceiling crisis before the end of the fiscal year. This is where the rubber meets the roads, right here and now, and possibly for the last time. That's why they're running out the clock. For his part, Trump thinks Manchin is doing the Lord's work and went out of his way to say so. Quote, it's a very important thing, unquote, the former president told Fox Business this morning. Quote, he's doing the right thing and it's a very important thing, unquote. Of course, Trump was all over McConnell to do away with the filibuster back when Republicans held the majority, but consistency has not been a GOP strong suit for a while now. Besides, the rest of that interview involved Trump howling about, quote, phony lock boxes, unquote, on Facebook that accounted for, quote, 96% Biden votes, unquote. Maybe not so much for listening to that guy anymore under any circumstances, please. This situation has been a ticking time bomb since the returns came in last November and revealed the Democratic Senate majority to be exactly as tall as Vice President Kamala Harris. No. That's not since the returns came in late November. It's since the returns came in on, what was it, January 6th or January 7th or January 8th. That's when they got the two senators from Georgia in. Did you forget William Rivers Pitt? That's when the Senate majority became exactly as tall as Vice President Kamala Harris. The progressives in the House are on the verge of a full-scale flip-out, but at present, there seems to be no omnibus solution to the Manchin dilemma. Well, I have some suggestions about that, but they will have to wait a little while longer. Someone might ask Chuck Schumer what business an obstructionist right-wing Democrat from a sparsely populated coal state has chairing the Energy Committee. But punish Manchin too severely, and he could switch parties. He would pay no price for this. Trump won Virginia by pretty much all the points, and the GOP would erect statues in honor of him, and McConnell would retain majority control, thus giving vital chairmanships back to luminaries like Lindsey Graham and Chuck Grassley. I believe we all had about a budget of that bad news the last time around. One thing you're forgetting, William Rivers Pitt, about this: if Joe Manchin switches parties, then he's going to have to run in the Republican primary against someone by the name of Jim Justice. And Jim Justice is a Trumpist who's likely to have the support of Donald Trump and the West Virginia Republican Party. He's the current governor of West Virginia. And he probably has a pretty good hold on the West Virginia Republican Party. Can Joe Manchin beat him in the Republican primary? If not, Joe Manchin's career is dead. He's dead in 2024. If he wants to run as the Democratic candidate in 2024, he's going to have to stick with the Democrats, whatever they do to him. Does Joe Biden have enough Lyndon Johnson in him to get in there and lay about with a rhetorical 2x4 until Manchin sees the error of his ways? Because that seems to be the only way out of this impasse, short of a media strike or an attack by Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. Biden has nothing of substance to threaten Manchin with, and Manchin knows full well he is sitting on an ace-high straight. If the senior senator from West Virginia does not fold, this promises to be another futile, infuriating summer. Well, I have some ideas about that too, and they involve the things Joe Biden can do. But before I get to that, next, we have a reminder of things Joe Biden can do. How Biden could give everyone Medicare on his own. The people of Libby, Montana, population 2628, yes, I have covered this article before, share something in common with the rest of the developed world, but not their compatriots in the United States. They all have access to a single-payer Medicare for All system. As part of the Affordable Care Act, the residents of Libby, Montana, who were exposed to hazardous airborne asbestos from a vermiculite mine owned by the W.R. Grace Company, were made eligible for Medicare for free at the discretion of the Social Security Administration and the Department of Health and Human Services. It was codified in Section 1881A of the Social Security Act. The language of the statute refers to any individuals subject to an environmental exposure, though it was well understood at the time this was about Libby, Montana. But of course, the bill had to be written in a general way. You can't write an exceptions bill for Libby, Montana, the only place in the United States. So the point is, the bill applies to everybody and to any environmental exposure the president wants to make it apply to. What is the current environmental exposure we all are subject to? It is COVID-19, of course. I'll go on with the article. The fact that the chair of the Senate Finance Committee back then, Max Baucus, hailed from Montana, played no small part in creating Medicare for all the Libyans. That is, the Libyans in Libya, Montana, not the Libyans in Libya. But the principle was solid. Through no fault of their own, these residents were subject to a dangerous environmental hazard that could trigger long-term medical complications. The government considered it only right to pick up the exorbitant healthcare costs for these individuals. There's an environmental health hazard spreading through the entire country right now. It's infecting people unsuspectingly and killing hundreds of thousands. Actually, by now it's killed about 1 million people. It's bound to saddle those who survive with long-term, some of those who survive anyway, with long-term and potentially debilitating health consequences. And using Section 1881A, the incoming Biden administration can give all 11 million people infected with COVID, and now, of course, there are many more people who have been infected with COVID, and if they want to be really aggressive, all Americans who have tested positive for coronavirus, the option of free Medicare coverage immediately. I do not expect Joe Biden to use this power on Inauguration Day to instantly turn the United States to a single-payer country, but there's nothing in the law that would appear to prevent him from doing it. This is the larger point. The United States Code doesn't make for scintillating leisure reading, but buried in it are countless options for a president to help people. And once you start orienting yourself in that fashion, thinking about what you can do under the law rather than what you cannot, the possibilities really open up. The primary pilot program in Section 1881A is the Libby, Montana program, but the executive branch is also given the authority to establish optional pilot programs to any area subject to a public health emergency declaration. The entire United States has been under a public health emergency since January 31st, 2020, due to the coronavirus. It's possible that the Environmental Protection Agency would have to declare a separate public health emergency under the Superfund law to comply with the statute, but Biden's EPA administrator could easily do so. Individuals eligible for Medicare would have to spend 6 months in the geographic area subject to the emergency. Since the area is the entire United States, this should not be a problem either. At that point, the individual with exposure to the environmental hazard files an application for Medicare benefits and receives them if they meet the proper criteria. The statute cites that those eligible for benefits must have a diagnosis of ailments like mesothelioma, and other consequences from asbestos exposure. But an addendum at the bottom of the statute, makes the statute applicable to any individual, quote, exposed to a health hazard to which an emergency declaration applies based on such medical conditions, diagnostic standards, and other criteria as the Secretary specifies. Cutting through the legislationese, this means that HHS could create a specific pilot program around COVID-19. We know there are going to be specific long-term costs from COVID-19. While we're still learning about, quote, long-haul COVID patients, it is possible they could experience a lifetime of health problems from their infection, whether through severe lung damage, heart failure, or gastrointestinal complications. The cost of managing these difficulties will be high and probably out of reach for most people. It's cost-effective to put them on Medicare and ensure they don't have to go bankrupt because they were unlucky enough to contract the virus. The U.S. did something similar with kidney disease under Richard Nixon, and for first responders with respiratory problems after spending time at 9/11 cleanup sites. But unlike these two programs, which required congressional action, the president invoking Section 1881A could do this through executive action rather than having to get a new law through Congress. If you really wanted to push it, you could do what they did in Libya, give Medicare to everyone, whether they showed symptoms or not, based on the potential for an environmental exposure. As long as the runoff from the W.R. Grace mine was still in the air, the residents of Libya needed the peace of mind they would be covered from the health consequences. The entire U.S. public needs that same kind of reinsurance in the face of the coronavirus. Yes, Joe Biden ran against the single-payer system in the election. He did run on free coronavirus treatment for all those infected, and triggering Section 1881A would do just that. This declaration could also guarantee a free vaccine. He's not likely to make the incredibly aggressive moves to use COVID as a pretext to give everyone the option for government-run health care. That's just reality. But it's also reality Biden has this option to protect people suffering from coronavirus and even those afraid to get tested because they know they cannot afford the treatment. Furthermore, Section 1881A is the kind of creative policy thinking that's going to be required of a Biden administration on day one if it wants to make progress for the American people, especially if Mitch McConnell and the Republicans hold on to the Senate, which, of course, they did not do. But in effect, with Joe Manchin blocking the filibuster, and with Joe Manchin refusing to vote with the Democrats on H.R. 1 and H.R. 4, it's just as if the Republicans and Mitch McConnell had held on to the Senate. Maybe Biden doesn't want to instantly create Medicare for all, but through a range of laws that vest power in the president, he could seize drug patents to dramatically lower the cost of drugs, prescription drugs. He could change bad Obamacare rules that cost low-income families using the exchanges roughly $2 billion every year. He could do all kinds of things laid out in the day one agenda that would have tangible and enduring benefits for people. Since 1789, the legislative branch was placing a set of powerful authorities in the president's lap. It does not violate any notion of our system of government for the president to look for creative ways to use those authorities. In fact, it's the very job description of the chief executive. If President-elect Biden wants to respond to the tragedy of coronavirus by giving millions of people public health care, he could, and he should be thinking about how to do a whole lot more. This was written by Dave Dayen. I forget if I told you that. How Biden could get everyone Medicare on his own. It was written on November 17th, 2020, okay, by Dave Dayen. Okay, it's a great piece, okay, and that connects me now to my recommendations concerning what Joe Biden ought to do in the face of the intransigence, okay, of Joe Manchin. Bonnie has a question. I'm going to let her ask it.
Okay, if all governors decided to join that state and use the Medicare for all for their people in their states, it would take all the pressure off of Biden.
It is not something the Republican governors would do. It also, in every state, it would involve the passage of a Medicare for All Act at the state level. And that's not going to happen in most of the states, the United States, in a short period of time. It might happen in 6 or 7 of the states, and maybe some of the most populous states, but it's not going to happen, in a short period of time. And it will only happen in states that are controlled by Democrats, okay? And even there, it's very hard to get over what the healthcare industry would try to do, to block that. Okay, so getting to this. I think what Biden has to do is ramp up his own popularity drastically. And there are 3 things that he can do in short order to do this. One of the things is to mint a 1 ounce of a platinum coin with $100 trillion face value, or to be precise, to order the Secretary of the Treasury to order the mint to produce such a coin and to deposit it in the public enterprise fund account of the mint at the New York Fed. The platinum coin seigniorage, or the coin seigniorage, would then be swept from the public enterprise fund account by the Treasury into the Treasury spending account, because the Secretary of the Treasury has the right to sweep the public enterprise fund account for the coin seigniorage in it, at any time. If a $100 trillion platinum coin is minted and placed in the public enterprise fund account, nearly all of the face value of that coin will be the coin seigniorage that is swept into the Treasury spending account. This creates a balance of $100 trillion in the Treasury spending account, which will cover all of the repayment of debt which the United States has, all the repayment of debt instruments and interest due on the debt instruments as those repayments fall due. Nothing should be repaid before it falls due, because that is inflationary. But it is not inflationary to repay the debt as it falls due. The 100T is much more than is needed to repay the debt. It's also enough to but to remove the necessity for the Treasury Department to breach the debt ceiling. In other words, the debt ceiling crisis simply goes away when that happens, because the money within the Treasury spending account can pay all the debt instruments as they fall due. In the first 6 months, most probably $3 to $6 trillion could be paid off. And there goes the debt ceiling crisis. And it will never occur again, because the debt will be totally repaid over 30 years as it falls due, at the end of which time it will be zero, unless the Treasury Department decides to issue more debt instruments for other reasons, other than that it needs some revenue. Why is that important for Biden to do? Why will it make him very popular? Because, one, it makes him a very strong figure, doing something new, doing something strong, taking debt terrorism off the table, taking austerity off the table, because you can't say anymore how you're going to pay for it. The way the Treasury pays for it is the way it's always paying for things, by sending wires into the bank accounts of the recipients of its payments. That's what it normally does. Sometimes it will send checks, but it's basically the same thing. It sends checks or it sends wires. That's how you're going to pay for it. And as long as there's a huge amount of money in the Treasury spending account, the question will never rise again how you're going to pay for it. And if that question never rises again, then, of course, when Joe Biden wants to spend huge amounts on an infrastructure bill, when he wants to go to $7 trillion or to $10 trillion, in order to get some Green New Deal in there, there won't be any Republicans or anybody else that could sensibly say that we can't afford it. Not with $100 trillion in the bank. So, that puts pressure on the Congress to pass that kind, okay, of legislation for the simple reason that they don't have the "we can't afford" excuse anymore. Now, they're going to whip hard on the inflation thing. Oh, there's going to be terrible inflation. Oh, there's going to be terrible inflation. But they're going to have a much harder time winning that fight when people want what is in the infrastructure bills. If Biden expands his infrastructure bill, for example, to put a job guarantee program in it, okay, at a living wage for everyone across the United States who wants a job. If they object to it and they fail to pass it in 2022, they're going to have to run on it. Biden gets to run on that infrastructure bill without anybody saying we can't afford it. I know Biden's not running for re-election in 2022, but his Democratic charges in Congress are. And they can all run on that. And they can all say, with Joe Biden and his giant infrastructure bill that he could never get through the Congress because of the intransigence of the Republicans and Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, and we're going to take care of them in 2024, by the way. But we're going to get this for you, and you absolutely see we can because we have the $100 trillion bill in there. So that's the first thing Biden can do. The second thing Biden can do is he can use Section 1881A of the Social Security Act and make everybody eligible for Medicare if they want to get Medicare for free at the discussion of the Social Security Administration and the Department of Health and Human Services. He'd be perfectly within his authority to invoke Section 1881A. And if that's going to cost money, well, again, that bill has been passed. And the authority for people to charge against it would be authorized by Section 1881A. It would be an obligation of the Treasury to pay those bills. And the Treasury would have the money in the Treasury spending account because he minted the $100 trillion coin. You see, the $100 trillion coin, you follow immediately with attempts to pass infrastructure bills while all that argy-bargy is going on. You introduce free Medicare for everyone in the United States because we've all been exposed to the environmental hazard, okay, of COVID-19. The third thing that I would do, and you don't have to do, well, the best thing to do is, the first thing to do is the $100 trillion coin. That's easy. That will take only 3 days. And that will be spectacular. Just spectacular. But then, the third thing to do, I still think it should be the third thing, is to eliminate all the student debt that Biden can legally eliminate. There are disagreements about how much he can legally eliminate. I think there's pretty good consensus that he can eliminate at least 90% of it. Okay, what does that do? It gets 44 million people with no or very poor health insurance, totally in back of Joe Biden because he gave them free Medicare. It gets another 45 million people totally in back of Joe Biden because he's forgiven their student debt. Now, that's not quite a precise calculation. There's probably an overlap between these two groups. So instead of his getting 90 million people behind him immediately, he would only be getting 60 to 70 million people behind him immediately by taking these two actions. Or these three actions. What do you think his popularity would be after he had done that? Would it reach 90%? I don't know. But it would be overwhelming. And while this is going on, he campaigns for infrastructure. He campaigns against Joe Manchin. He campaigns against the filibuster. More and more pressure builds up on Manchin and Sinema and the other opponents, okay, of getting rid of the filibuster. And eventually, they are going to fold. H.R. 1 is going to be passed in some form. H.R. 4 is going to pass because Manchin is going to scurry over to H.R. 4. If he wants to hold his position, okay, in H.R. 1, he's going to have to give up the filibuster on H.R. 4. And if he gives up the filibuster on H.R. 4, that's going to make his position on the filibuster even weaker because people are going to be shouting at him to do the same thing on H.R. 1. And he's going to have to come up with specific objections to H.R. 1, not the simple bullshit, I'm against H.R. 1 because it doesn't have enough Republicans in back of it. He's not going to be able to get away with that. He's going to have to say, what's wrong with H.R. 1? Now, there are things wrong with H.R. 1. It discriminates against third parties. It's no good for the possibility of a multi-party system, which the two-party system really needs. Because a big reason why the two-party system has gotten so far from the people is that neither of the two parties ever have to fear a third party. For their own good, they need third parties, and we need a multi-party system. And we need to take the discriminatory aspects out of H.R. 1. So I'd like to see Manchin come up with objections to H.R. 1. So progressives could start putting in objections to H.R. 1. So we get H.R. 1 modified. But of course, modified in such a way that it protects completely against voter suppression, gerrymandering, and decertification of elections by partisan state legislatures. That has to be done as well. But those three things that I am advocating, they will give Biden much more power. He now has to care about increasing his own power and overwhelming the opposition, the dishonorable opposition in Congress. You know that op-ed was invented by Manchin out of whole cloth. He expects us to accept that line, okay, of BS. Of course, I refuted every point he made. And others that I've quoted here have refuted every point, or many points, okay, that he made. Okay, I'm sure among us all, we've refuted every point he made multiple times. And there are lots more people out there playing that game today. His op-ed was just a piece of BS We know why he objects to the filibuster. We know why he wants to cloak himself in bipartisanship. Because the man is addicted to power. And because he has his own private interests which are at stake. There are things in H.R. 1 which the things arising from conflict of interest, which would hurt him. There are things in other bills that the progressives would want to get through Congress, which would hurt him. And he wants to hold on to power to block those. Not for the people of West Virginia. He doesn't give a damn about the people of West Virginia. It's for himself and for his power and for his family. That's what this is about. This guy is a sellout to the Constitution. He's a sellout for our democracy. He's Dishonorable Joe. I originally had a less polite word in that title, but I decided to tone it down a bit. I now turn to your comments. Steve Wolfbrand says hi. Holly Horn says hello. I am not seeing any more of your comments. I know not why. I am going to refresh my page because I can't see your comments. Back, I can now see all your comments. So here we are. Holly says, hello, Dr. Firestone. And Holly says, hello, Ghost Start. Dolores says, hi, everyone. Holly Horn says, hi, Dolores Piers. Badlana says, hi, all. Steve Wolfbrand says, Steve Gonzo, coked up Hunter talking like a rapper. It's pretty disgusting. Carmen Yunus says, well, that the squad needs to get on that Libby Montana issue in a jiffy. That was, what happened here? I got a comment at 9:06. I got a comment at 9:39 from Lana who says, hi, all. Hi, Lana. And then I get a comment from Steve Wolfbrand at 10:14. And then at 10:15, Carmen Yunus says, well, the squad needs to get on that Libby Montana issue in a jiffy. I don't know how they would do it. I don't think the squad gets to talk to Biden. Steve Wolfbrand says, okay, I guess we're getting old. But look at the doc. He doesn't slow down. Kay says, he's got more energy than I do, Steve. Laugh out loud. Steve Wolfbrand says, 9/11 was an inside job. Kay says, he has a happier life, though, which gives him energy. And Steve says, Epstein didn't kill himself. Carmen says, why doesn't Dave Dayen run for office? He could set him straight. I don't think he runs for office because I think that he values the role of journalist that he's occupying right now. I mean, he's gotten to do some great things. Carmen says, Bonnie, the point is that Republicans want to sabotage the Biden administration, not empower it. Carmen says, does Dave Dayen know about the $100 trillion coin? Perhaps he could write about it. He does know about the $100 trillion coin, but Carmen, I've written the only book about the $100 trillion coin. Well, it's about Actually, it's about the platinum coin seigniorage. Okay, but in the book, I advocate for high value platinum coins. I believe in the revised version of that book in 2014, I advocate for the $60 trillion coin. In articles since, though, of course, I have also proposed the $100 trillion coin. But the mechanics are the same of how to handle it. It's the same for the $1 trillion coin as it is for the $100 trillion coin. But of course, the $100 trillion coin has a lot more impact. Fox News host calls for Vladimir Putin to assassinate Joe Biden. What? Kay says single payer would give us all a better healthcare outcome too. Carmen says Yellen is yelling inflation now. Not so much. And Kay says, I might be able to trust the doctors again. You might be able to. Carmen says, but Biden won't give up. It's okay. Won't give up that stupid Affordable Care Act to preserve that faux Obama legacy so people will continue to suffer and die needlessly. Maybe he'll give up the stupid Affordable Care Act if he understands that if he wants to have the popularity he needs to have to get over Joe Manchin, he's got to do the three things that I specified. That's what's going to give him the win in this particular ball game. Evelina says, apparently so. A lot of literature on that. Kay says, hi, Evelina, glad to see you. Warren Chamberlain says, I am getting sleepy. With all that dynamic commentary from me, you're getting sleepy, Warren? Lana Dell says, the other side will be shouting socialism. Ha ha. Yeah, we can start shouting socialism too, right? Steve Wolfbrand says, me too. Warren says, I'm going to have to sign off very soon. That's okay, Warren. It's perfectly all right. Steve Wolfbrand says, sleep well, and I echo that too, Warren. Sleep well. Evelina Pont says, hi, Kay. Almost your birthday. Have a great day tomorrow. Happy birthday, Kay. Happy almost birthday. Kay says, does Biden care if he gets more power, or is he happy to just blame the GOP? I got to think he wants to do something. I mean, really, why did he want to be president if he didn't want to do anything? You know, he's a 78-year-old man. He's already got $15 million. I mean, why didn't he just go home and eat ice cream? He must have wanted to do something. He must have at least have wanted to be recognized as a better president than Barack Obama. I mean, look how they treated him in the Obama administration. They made fun of him. They had nothing but contempt for him because he went to Syracuse University instead of going to one of the Ivies. Steve Gonza says, build back better, bitter, batter, butter. Kay says, thank you, Evelina Pont, I hope, but we'll see. Yeah, gotta wonder. I think he's happy to be a one-term president. That's what I'm thinking, Evelina. An hour seems to be missing. Yes, an hour of commentary seems to be missing from my stream here. I don't know why. It is a puzzle to me. Sometimes StreamYard does that. It screws around. It screws up. Like now I'm getting new comments. Carmen says, I guess the 1400 was Biden's last hurrah. Well, it doesn't have to be. Okay, it doesn't have to be. He has, as I explained actually last time, There are things he can do to pass multiple reconciliation bills between now and the end of September. In those reconciliation bills, he can put more COVID relief. He can give people more $2,000 checks. He ought to do so. And you know why he ought to do so? What the justification should be? He should say that while the economy is waking up now, people suffered for month after month during the Trump administration while COVID was going on because Trump would not advocate for and pass a $2,000 a month payment to everybody during the COVID crisis. So to make up for that, he's going to provide $2,000 a month payments now for all the months of 2020 when the economy remained depressed because of COVID. If he does something like this and ends up handing people $22,000 apiece, he's going to be very, very popular. Maybe then the inflation hawks will have something real to talk about. Steve Wolfbrand says maybe he needs more hair transplants. Can we talk about Michelle now? Just kidding. Just kidding. So, in vain, I look for my missing comments. I suppose I could find them on Facebook, but well, I've got plenty of space now. Hang on a second. Let me go back to Facebook, see if I can pick up those earlier comments. I can get some of them there. I can't get any YouTube comments, but I can get the Facebook comments. And see what they are. Very, very popular. Maybe then the inflation hawks and see what they are. Very, very popular. Maybe then the inflation hawks and see what they. Okay, so now. Okay, so there we go. I think I silenced the echo now. And that should work. And I think I can see, I can probably see some of the earlier comments now on Facebook. I still can't see any comments that appeared on YouTube. So let me see how far I can get. Well, hang on a second. Okay. Still looking for that comment stream. Carmen says they were good comments. Kay says federal job guarantee would be better, I think. For some reason I can't unroll the comment thread here. I don't know why. Well, I guess I'm not going to be able to do that to see the whole comment thread. Let me try one more thing. Maybe then the inflation hawks will have some. Okay. Well, I still can't see. I don't seem to be able to get any more comments. I don't know why. Okay, I can't explain it. But I think it is what it is at this point. And we are nearing the end. Carmen says they were good comments. Lana says, I'm concerned about the end of the eviction moratorium. I'm concerned about that too. That might create a terrible crisis for people and a terrible crisis for the country. Okay, folks, I'm going to say good night since I can't seem to access those earlier comments anyway. I don't know what went wrong there. It's a StreamYard thing. No comments between 9:06 and 9:39. Actually, no Facebook comments. There were no Facebook comments between. No, Holly Horns was a YouTube comment. Oh, this is what happened. There were a bunch of YouTube comments that I got beginning at 9:03. The first Facebook comment I got was at 10:14. All the Facebook comments before then actually failed to appear. And by the way, I did get a YouTube comment from Lana at 10:34, but the first Facebook comment appeared at 10:14. Kay says, Lana says good night. Steve says good night. Kay says, shit happens, Joe, but thank you all for another great discussion. Love you all. And we love you too, Kay. Have a great night, everybody. I'll be back tomorrow night with another. Thank you for coming. Thank you for staying. Good night, all.